Welcome to the Word on Campus, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at how some of the best university podcasts get made. Jenny Luna is here with me today. She is the Senior Digital Content Producer at Stanford University Graduate School of Business, managing all podcast products for them. And in this episode, we're going to focus on their podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart, which provides the tools, techniques, and best practices to help you communicate more effectively. And this show has consistently held top spots on the Apple podcast charts in the business and career categories. And we're going to dig into that and more. So Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
All right. So first of all, what was your background like? Did you have an interest in audio before working on Think Fast, Talk Smart?
Yeah, I did. I actually went to journalism school, and I was at Columbia Journalism School, the class of 2015, which is the same year that Serial
Mm-hmm.
launched. So I felt like
Mm.
I was in the right place at the right time in terms of podcasting. So I was focused on audio storytelling when I was in journalism school, and then afterward worked at a food politics podcast for Mother Jones Magazine. So when I
Mm.
started at Stanford, even though I was hired to do more digital content creation and social media, it always was on the back of my mind. I want to start a podcast here.
Okay. And did you ever start your own podcast by any chance for yourself?
People ask me that all the time. What's my podcast going to be?
Yeah.
And ironically, I don't feel like I have a lot to say. And I really get jazzed about being behind the scenes and helping elevate other voices or talk about things that are interesting. I didn't have my own podcast, but when I worked in San Francisco, I loved making my own radio stories. So going out in the
Mm.
field and recording people and doing more reported, narrated segments.
Ah, sure, sure. Okay. Yeah, you have things to say. Don't be so humble about it. Well,
My
well,
my
so,
old my longtime dream is for me and my pen pal of 12 years to sit down and just read our old letters from each other. So that might be one. It would be probably an
wow.
audience of two, but we may get to it someday.
Three. I'm interested in listening to that. Really quick. Where's the pen pal? Where are they?
Well, we started when I lived in Spain, and
Okay.
she lived in Nevada, and then she moved to New York and Ohio. She's a critical theory PhD professor, and so she's lived all over the US, and we've really been in touch just writing letters the past 12 years of our life, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool to look back on. And ironically, she just moved to the Bay Area, so we're still writing letters, but it only takes about a day and a half to get to each other.
Hey, letters are better than emails, so keep on doing that.
Yeah.
But that's fun. Lots of crossover there in the education realm. So let me ask you this: when you first heard about Think Fast, Talk Smarts, like how did that show come to be? Was it your idea? Was it the host idea? Was it some communications initiative? Like how did it come to be?
This is a really fun story, and Matt and I think about it a lot. So,
Hmm.
Matt gave a talk at an alumni reunion for the Graduate School of Business maybe 10 years ago at this point. He didn't know the talk was being recorded, and it got onto YouTube. And I think somehow the algorithm, the mystery of YouTube, linked how to give a speech or how to publicly speak with Matt's talk that he called Think Fast, Talk Smart. And so it sort of exploded. And at that point, I was working on the content team. And I said, I want to make a podcast. And so they said, well, let's start with something that we know our audience is interested in. We looked at this video from Matt that was getting thousands of hits an hour, pretty much. And we
Mm.
thought, well, he teaches communication. Would he be interested? So we asked Matt to coffee at Coupa Cafe there on campus. And we sat him down and we said, would you ever want to start a podcast? And at that point, I don't know if he had really even listened to podcasts, but he is someone who's always game to try new things. So it started from there, and our first episode launched in January of 2020. So
Mm.
sort of the next hurdle was, of course, March when everything shut down. We had published about 6 episodes at this point. We had done all of our recordings in studio on campus. And Matt called me, and I remember I was in my front yard. Everybody was working from home. It was probably like March 16th. And he said, you know what? I've got two teenage sons at home. They know about recording equipment. I think I can pull this off from home. I want to keep going with this.
Yeah.
So I think it was also right place at the right time because people were having to figure out how to communicate via Zoom and on screens. And so we did a lot of content around then, right as
Hmm.
we were going through that same challenge ourselves.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, so you said as an episode, one of your many favorites called Leading from Home, How to Create the Right Environment for Communication. Can you give us a gist about what this episode's about?
Yeah, this episode is with a professor of marketing, Jonathan Lavov, and he talks a lot about his research. He does research on decision fatigue.
Hmm.
He does research on the way hybrid work works and ways that leaders can manage better when you're both in the office and at home, and how to manage expectations as a leader. He's done a
Hmm.
lot of really interesting research, and he does an excellent job of talking about it in a way that's really engaging.
And this episode won an award, right?
Yes, it won a Webby, which just feels so exciting to us. I think that's something we never really thought we would be in the running for, and so to
Hmm.
win felt really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So we're gonna play a clip of this, and while people are listening, kind of what do you want to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, this one for me was really interesting because it was the first time we had a studio recording, and I actually had something happen. I can't remember what, where I couldn't be in the studio. And so
Hmm.
Matt was the only one. There was no producer with him.
Wow.
And we don't have a very high tech studio by any means, but just the fact that you're hosting and you have to press record and watch the levels can be really intimidating. But Matt nailed it. He did it himself. He ran all the equipment. He managed to get us the file. I think it sounded great. And the other reason I really liked this episode is when I listened to it, when Matt sent me the file, I realized that because Matt and Jonathan have a friendship, the
Hmm.
episode was already at a different level. There was
Hmm.
rapport. It was less question, answer, question, answer. It was a conversation between the two of them. I think there's a point where they tease each other or laugh. So I
Hmm.
really started to think about tapping into Matt's network for guests or having Matt meet people even before the interview, because I think having that rapport can really strengthen the interview when the recording's happening.
Got it. Well, okay, so let's take a quick listen to this. All right, 5 seconds. All right. All right. So coming back here, you mentioned the rapport element, right, between Matt and his guest. Um, I'm curious, when for guests who the host does not have as much, previous experience with, not like such a long friendship, how do you build as much rapport as you can before the interview?
That's a great question. That's something we're still experimenting with, but I can tell you about one small change that we've made where I've noticed a bit of difference.
Hmm.
So we used to have people come down into the studio, and our studio is in a basement and it's in a sort of enclosed space. And so it immediately was setting up sort of a nervous energy because it's a small space. You have to use a lot of key cards to get in through the doors.
Yeah, top secret. Yeah.
And then we thought, this is setting up an intimidating environment. And we noticed the warm ups would take longer. So now Matt meets the guest upstairs at the campus coffee shop,
Hmm.
and he asks them about their day, and they may or may not grab a coffee depending on time, and then he walks them down to the studio. And I've noticed that even those 5 minutes can really help the person settle in, and then we can sort of make a joke about, like, okay, welcome to the dungeon of the studio. It's a tight space, get ready to get comfortable, and then we can sort of ease them into the conversation.
Gotcha. And let me ask this: are most interviews in person or remote?
I think we are probably a little more than half are remote. So we are
Okay.
probably doing 60 to 70% remote because that just allows us to reach a much what let's try that over. We are slightly more remote. It's not quite 50-50. I would say we're probably doing 60 to 70% of our interviews remotely because it just allows us to reach a wider range of experts who are basically all over the world. We just interviewed someone in Ireland last Friday.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of getting people comfortable in the remote setting, do you do something like pre-calls or what happens there?
I wish we could say that we did a lot of pre-calls and we did so much prep, but I
Yeah.
also have the luxury of working with Matt Abrahams, who is a communication specialist. So
Right.
I have to say he has a wonderful way, even via screen, of warming people up. And often the people he's chatting with are somehow in his network. So he
Mm.
can bring up a common colleague that they have, or maybe they taught together years ago. So I think he leans a little bit on that for the beginning of the call.
Mm.
Um, and he does sometimes send them some questions beforehand if they ask, because we think that can sometimes make guests more comfortable.
Mm, gotcha. And for guests, how do you source guests? Who's the ideal Think Fast, Talk Smart guest for you?
Wow, that's a great question. So we really started with just graduate school of business faculty. So professors of marketing, professors of organizational behavior, and then we branched out to Stanford at large.
Hmm.
We talked to Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist, people at the law school, the med school, the School of Education. And then we just started reaching even more broadly outside of that. So
Mm.
for me, it's really important that the person isn't coming on just to promote their coaching business. For example, we get a lot of pitches from people who are communication coaches, executive coaches, and it's a way to get their name out there and their brand. It's really important to us that there's still an academic element,
Hmm.
or there's an element of track record leadership. So, for example, we had Kim Scott on recently, and while Kim Scott isn't a professor in any sense, she's had such high ranking positions in Facebook and Google over the years that
Mm.
I want to hear about her management experience. I think it also helps if someone has written a book so that we can read the ideas that they have and then talk about how we want to share them on the show.
Sure, sure. So for some of the guests who are from more of like an academic group, how do you balance kind of this academic background with like storytelling? Because on some podcasts I work with, right, if it's like a faculty member, sometimes where they're so passionate about their work that they really get into it, but it's not being told in a way for, I guess, a layman, right? So how do you kind of prep for that or prep the guests for that?
That is a challenge, and we've run into that quite a few times. Some are some people are great at teaching, and so they have that sort of stage presence and they can tell the stories, and
Hmm.
some are great at research and they can talk about their research, but all of a sudden you're having a conversation with jargon and you know that the listener is lost. So a lot of times we will, because we're obviously editing this, we will just say, "Can you say that again?" Wait,
Yeah.
and often sort of put it on ourselves. You know what? I'm sorry. I there was a mis. You can almost sort of fib. My equipment. I heard like a popping sound. Could you say that again? Because often, once someone says something once, they have a chance to say it. When they have a chance to say it again, they're going to say it a little bit more clearly and a little more succinctly. And
Mm.
then again, we also say, "Can you give me an example of that?" That's a big follow-up question. And then something Matt does as a host that I think has made Think Fast Talk Smart really something Matt that something Matt has done as a host that's been great for Think Fast Talk Smart is paraphrasing
Mm.
what his guests say. So after each answer, he's really doing the job of guiding the listener through.
Ah, okay. No, that's a very important key. So you mentioned 2 points there. One is okay, fibbing a little, all right, just having them repeat it, and then the second element of the role of the host kind of expanding from just question asking, right, into paraphrasing and kind of synthesizing ideas as they come along, right?
I see
And
what you're doing there. Are you paraphrasing me talking
uh,
about paraphrasing?
yeah, yeah. I'm learning on the spot. I'm learning on the spot.
Nice. Love it.
Did Matt was Matt always doing that like from the very beginning, or was it kind of a learned skill over time? What do you think?
I think a learned skill over time, especially in those episodes where he saw exactly what you just described, someone speaking a little bit more in jargon or getting
Hmm.
more into the academic side. Because we started the podcast really with only folks Matt knew or had a rapport with, those were easy. They were conversations, they were light. But as we started to talk to more people who he wasn't familiar with, he started to really use the paraphrasing after each answer.
Okay. Okay. Got it. It's like learn to say over time. I mean, for many hosts, there's definitely a host coaching element, and definitely the more reps you get in, right, the more easily it comes to you, I guess. So let me kind of dig into a different topic here. I think we have to talk about the reach of Think Fast, Talk Smart, which goes, nowadays way beyond just the Stanford JSB community. And as we're recording this show, I was just checking it out. I think on Apple, at least, you guys have 400 plus ratings. And then I'm sure a ton of subscribers. I know you have a ton of downloads. So can you tell me about how you and your team kind of worked over time to gain this notoriety?
Yes. And Robert, I wish I could list these are the top five things we totally did and we knew what we were doing, but it's a little bit of a black box in
Mm,
some aspects, but I can tell you a lot of my ideas of why I think it's done so well. First is timing, starting in January of 2020 and then really continuing through March.
mm,
That was big for us. Even bigger than that is having the Stanford brand. I think
mm,
being able to offer something for free that is quick and easy to digest and people see that it's from Stanford is really helpful. People want to learn, and when it has that S, they know I'm about to get some really good education for some from some, from institutional leaders, from people that are changing the world.
mm,
So I think having the Stanford brand to lean on was great, as well as having the Stanford social media channels as well. Another thing I think that was in our favor for growth was our YouTube channel. We have a lot of subscribers for our YouTube channel. We also made sure that Matt was promoting the podcast on each episode,
mm.
making sure to tell people where else they could find episodes, asking them to rate and subscribe. That was a big thing that we tried to incorporate early on. We were also really diligent about publishing and we didn't take a break. We have seen on the weeks where we have taken breaks over the summer or over the holidays, we see a slight dip in listenership.
Yeah.
And so we just moved from every 2 weeks to every week publishing an episode because people want the content and we want to be there for them. So that was another reason I think we were able to build audiences that if they subscribed, we were in the top of their podcast feed consistently. We didn't take a hiatus.
Yeah. Let me dig into one of those points. So the very first we mentioned was this launch timing from January, and this kind of time period from January to March. What about that makes it so special?
January, of course, people are wanting to try new things. They're wanting to improve their lives.
Mm,
That's new year, new you. So I think that is a very big part of it. In August and July, we see a dip. People are out of their routines.
mm,
January, they're wanting to start new routines. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, as COVID started, people were unsure how to communicate. And we were there with this podcast about communication, sort of at the right time when people were starting to type into Google, how do I lead a successful meeting over Zoom?
mm,
And then experts from Stanford are going to talk about that.
mm. So I think that one of the reasons why this show is so popular is just because of the topic of communication, right? It's so relevant to so many people, all around the world. And I'm curious, over these past few years, when you think about topic selection, how has that process, changed or stay the same? Do you think you'll ever run out of communication topics? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I totally agree, Robert, that the topic itself just lends itself to everybody wants to be a better communicator, whether you're a doctor delivering bad news, whether you're a lawyer, whether you want to talk to your spouse about money, like
Hmm.
it's everything and it's everywhere. So I don't think we'll ever run out of topics. I think we can reiterate on topics, but we're humans, we'll always be talking, and the way that we communicate will always be changing. So I
Mm,
think we'll always have things that are interesting and things to talk about. For example, one area that we haven't really talked about is intergenerational communication. We did one episode on sort of speaking with teenagers and young people. That was really interesting with Julie Lithcott-Hames of Stanford.
mm,
But that's something that I think about a lot. How I'm a millennial, how can I talk to Gen Z? What are the intergenerational communication lines in a workplace? I think there's a lot more personal communication stuff we could do.
mhm,
And I think it kind of leads to this notion that we all want to be better and get better and be our best selves.
mm.
And usually our target listeners are, we just heard about from 28 to about 37. And I also think that's a sweet spot where people start to look around and think, sort of like Taylor Swift, like, is it me? Am I not getting something right? Am I not getting myself across here?
Yeah,
So we sort of, I wouldn't say that we're self-help,
yeah.
but I think everyone, like you said, across the world is wanting to learn how to be a better communicator.
I'm a Swiftie. Are you a Swiftie?
I just started because I saw
Okay.
all this stuff on social media about the Eras tour. I was like, okay, I gotta
Yeah.
like figure out more about this person. So yes, but I'm very new to the game.
Same. Just this year.
Nice.
Just this
No,
year.
nice, nice.
But so coming back to the topic selection, uh, does your team ever find yourselves repeating topics?
We see a lot from our listeners that they want to hear about negotiation,
Mm,
and we've
okay.
done a few episodes on that, but I think we could do more. So I think we could even drill down further. So negotiation is huge. A lot
Mm,
of times, what I think about is mini series. So do you do a mini series on negotiation and do 6 episodes? One's talking about pay, one's talking about promotion. There's a lot of opportunity. So we do repeat topics because, for example, creativity. I think that's one of our most common topics, but we've
mm.
come at it from so many different angles that each episode still brings a ton of new value.
And how can you tell that people are looking for those topics? Are you just basing that off of down numbers for certain episodes or something else?
That's a great question. Yes, we look at the titles and the download numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and we really, when we title our episodes, we treat them like a headline. We want to get people interested in the topic. We don't put the guest's name because often the guest's name aren't recognizable. We're not interviewing celebrities or anything.
Like never put a guest name?
We will put them in the subtitle,
Hmm.
but we really like this how-to approach.
Okay.
So, leading from home, how to excel as a manager in a hybrid work world. So, we find that formula short, catchy phrase, and then how to, because that's what we're offering tools and techniques on how to improve your communication.
Right.
So, hold on, let me take a minute. What were you asking me again? Topics. Do I repeat topics? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. Oh well,
Okay.
I just stopped at hey, uh, do you never put your guest names there? And sometimes you do. Okay, got it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get back into this. But in terms of repeating topics, we also will just run a best of
Hmm.
if we see that it's had a lot of listeners. The other way that we've the other way is we've just been asking our listeners what they want to hear more of, and that's a result of really building our presence and our audience on LinkedIn. So we've been having Matt on episodes really tell people to go to LinkedIn. We've been posting things on LinkedIn, and we've been doing polls. So we use both Spotify and polls on LinkedIn to ask our listeners, hey, what do you want to hear more of? And we often hear negotiation, persuasion, and public speaking as the top answers for that.
So from a outsider's perspective, when I look at the kind of social community for Think Fast, Talk Smart, I'm always impressed because it seems really active and really engaged. Um, how did it become that way, and how do you guys build on engagements? Like what kind of lessons do you learn along the way for getting more people into the conversation?
I would love to give Matt a lot of credit because it's really due to him. He goes on LinkedIn and he likes and he recomments. So just as much as Think Fast Talk Smart has grown on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
Matt Abrahams has grown on LinkedIn. He's very engaged. If someone tags him, he responds. So he is definitely, I think, would say the biggest reason why our LinkedIn has grown so much. But
Hmm.
another thing is we've done a lot of fun giveaways. So we ask audience for our input and then we've mailed them mugs, for example, or maybe some stickers or some pins,
Yeah.
just some swag so that they feel part of the community. We also, it's a value of ours to be grateful. So we're also thanking our listeners as much as we can. That's a big one. And making sure that they're getting something of value for free, that they can come, they can connect with each other, they can connect with Matt. Another reason that I think our community has grown so much is Stanford Business School has a bunch of great online certificate programs,
Hmm.
and a lot of people who sign up for that, for example, Stanford Lead is one of them. They will also be really into the podcast, so we have that connection as well, where people are already taking a Stanford class online. And
Hmm.
so then they plug into the podcast and they're really excited and they're very engaged.
Okay, you just mentioned one of your values is gratefulness. Do you have a set of values for the show? Is that what I'm hearing?
Of course, we wouldn't make it otherwise. First and foremost is helping people.
Hmm.
That's our main mission and our main goal. And that's honestly why we've made a lot of the choices that we have. We want to grow as much as we can. For example, we've found a lot of people are using the show to learn English. So
Hmm.
we are doing a lot of English language learning to help that segment of our audience. That isn't necessarily something that we have experience in or something that aligns with the business school, but it's to help our listeners. That's really our main goal. And
Hmm.
then again, being grateful to our listeners.
That's cool. I don't often hear values associated with like a podcast production for a certain show. So I love it though. I think that should happen
Thank
more
you.
often.
I mean, it's so gratifying. I can't even tell you. We see the numbers come in, and like you said, they're
Hmm.
crazy. I remember the first time we put the episode up, and I was just waiting to see like 10, and now there's millions of people who listen, and that is great. But when you log on to LinkedIn and you see someone who writes, I used this technique in a meeting yesterday and it totally turned things around.
Hmm.
Or I used this when I talked to a family member over the holidays and it repaired our relationship. Like that, hearing from our listeners is so gratifying and it really puts faces to these numbers
Yeah.
that we see. And I think that is also what just continues our drive to keep making episodes and serving the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious about this. So, when working with Matt, how involved is he? So he's really active, in the social media audience engagement world. How much of a role does he have in the pre-production prep and other aspects?
Huge. I would say that Matt is as much of a producer as he is a host,
Hmm.
which I think is really rare, especially in the higher ed space when we're working with faculty who don't have a lot of time, who don't have a lot of experience. But Matt is often Matt is usually preparing all of his own questions. He's often taking the first pass of edits. So I feel very grateful to be working with him because I think we make a great team and he offers so much more than just his voice and communication expertise.
If you were to give like a ballpark guess, like how much time do you think Matt spends percentage wise on the podcast?
Percentage of his
Yeah,
life
percentage of his
or
life. Yeah, like in regards to other things that he does.
Matt, if you're listening, I hope you would agree and not take offense if I say 75%.
Wow, really?
He's I mean, I'm
Yeah.
I'm teasing him a little bit here, but he's very, like I said, he's very engaged. He's very interested in helping people. So he will go on LinkedIn and he will reach out to people. If people reach out to him to tell him to thank him about the show, he will respond with an email. So it's really just him wanting to connect with listeners and help people. And He's also an idea machine. So he is always coming up with new ideas and new guests and forming new relationships. He's on a bunch of other podcasts talking about Think Fast, Talk Smart. So I think there's a joke, and I'll have to ask him again. There's sort of a joke in his household where his wife teases him
Mm.
that he's like two people in one. He's
Yeah.
gets as much as two people would do. But he definitely has his Silicon Valley like meditation breaks,
Okay.
and he's kind of got his routine down. But I feel like I said, I don't think that's always the case for people on podcasts. I think the host doesn't normally carry as much of the production as Matt does.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask a question because I just want to highlight this importance of investment from all sides, right? And just commitment, level of commitment to the podcast. So it makes sense, right? With Matt's level of commitment, if you're saying 75% of his life, this show must be successful, right? It must be like growing. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I will say that when we first started out, I think part of our strategy was to bring him in and teach him how everything is made,
Mm,
because we had found in other situations where the professor or person just thought we would do everything. And so educating him on what was involved and kind of bringing him in early
mm.
was, I think really led to our success there as well.
Gotcha. Well, hey,
And being a lecturer versus a professor, those listening who work in higher ed definitely understand that. And I think lecturers, as Matt is, have to hustle in a different way than a tenure line professor does.
like slightly different like motivation in a way. Um,
Yeah.
so Jenny, looking forward, what are you excited about for the podcast? Kind of what's coming up?
Oh my gosh, I'm really excited. Wow, where to start? So, we're going to do a lot of new marketing efforts. We've just learned more about our audience. So, something we learned, for example, is that our gender split is 50-50, which is pretty rare in the podcast world, which to me, being in content, I'm immediately wanting to make more episodes for women, make a spin-off series for women. Clearly, people who identify as women are logging on and wanting to learn about communication techniques.
Mm,
And so, how can we speak to that audience? We are also doing a lot more cross promotion and marketing, which we haven't done in the past. So I'm looking forward to working with other podcasts, doing feed drops or cross promos. That's sort of new for us. And this is still my pie in the sky dream, but someday taking the show on the road, having Matt do a tour, and getting to really go shake the hands and interface with all of these listeners who are all over the world, that's that's the big dream.
I think it's coming up. That's coming up. It could be next year.
I'd love that. I'd
Yeah.
love that. You'd come? Should we go?
Yeah, please. I'll organize the event, for you guys. So,
Cool. Malaysia, Australia, the Philippines, Singapore. That's where the bulk of our listeners are.
yeah,
India.
yeah. I've never been to any of those places except for the Philippines, so that'll be a little adventure. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Jenny, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. It's been really fun. Thank you, Robert.
All right.